together when he put those two ingredients as a kind of a pair of locations together and yet separate.
When the lot has to be no further than 90 feet from.
Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906. La Crosse, Wisconsin. His life began in a quiet farming town, but the world around him was far from peaceful. His father, Ed Gein, was known as a violent man who often struggled with drinking. He could not keep a steady job, leaving the family in constant hardship. Ed's mother, Augusta, was a strict and deeply religious woman. She believed that the world was full of sin, and she often preached to Ed and his older brother Henry about the dangers of women and immorality. From a young age, Ed grew up in isolation. He had very few friends and was not allowed to socialize like other children. Augusta demanded obedience and often read the Bible to her sons, teaching them that most people were evil. Despite her controlling nature, Ed admired his mother deeply and grew dependent on her approval. Life on the farm was lonely and difficult. Ed's schoolmates described him as shy, with strange habits that made him stand out. Though he did well in reading, writing, and small tasks, he lacked social skills. He was often bullied, and instead of fighting back, he withdrew further into his own world. This early childhood shaped Ed's mind, laying the foundation for the disturbing path he would follow later in life. A troubled childhood. Ed Gein's childhood was marked by strict rules, loneliness, and emotional abuse. His father's drinking grew worse, and instead of finding comfort at home, Ed faced more fear. Ed Gein would lash out in anger, and Augusta made sure her sons felt that the world outside their home was dangerous. She often told Ed and Henry that women were sinful and should never be trusted. These lessons left a deep mark on Ed's young mind. At school, Ed struggled to connect with other children. He was shy, awkward, and often laughed at for being different. When classmates tried to include him, Augusta discouraged it, reminding him that friendships would only lead him toward evil. As a result, Ed became more isolated, finding it easier to live in silence than face rejection. Teachers noticed his strange behavior but also saw that he was polite and obedient, making it hard to see how much he was suffering inside. The combination of bullying at school and control at home created a world where Ed felt trapped. He began to retreat into fantasy, developing unusual habits and interests that kept him apart from others. While Henry grew more independent and started to resist their mother's harsh ways, Ed clung to Augusta, becoming more attached to her approval. This troubled childhood set Ed on a path where fear, loneliness, and confusion replaced any chance of a normal life. The death of his mother, the most defining moment in Ed Gein's life, was the death of his mother, Augusta. For years, she had been the center of his world, controlling his thoughts and shaping his beliefs. In 1940, Ed's father died after years of alcoholism, leaving Ed, his brother Henry, and Augusta alone on the farm. While Ed stayed close to his mother, Henry began to openly criticize her strict ways, worrying about Ed's unhealthy dependence on her. In 1944, Henry died in what was reported as an accident during a brush fire, though some suspected Ed had a hand in it. With Henry gone, Augusta became Ed's only focus. But in 1945, Augusta suffered a stroke and passed away shortly after. Her death left Ed completely shattered. For the first time, he was without the one person he trusted most. The farm grew silent, and Ed's isolation deepened. Without her control, he had no guidance, no sense of right or wrong. He boarded up rooms in the house that Augusta had used, almost like a shrine, leaving them untouched. He chose to live in small, dirty corners of the house instead. This loss broke the fragile balance in Ed's mind. The loneliness grew unbearable, and without Augusta's presence, his thoughts turned darker. Her death was not just the loss of a parent. It was the turning point that pushed Ed further into the disturbing world that would later shock the entire nation. Strange behavior in town. After the death of his mother, Ed Gein changed in ways that alarmed the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Once seen as shy but harmless, he now became even more withdrawn. Neighbors often described him as odd yet polite. He did small jobs around town, babysitting, repairing things, or working as a handyman. People found it strange that families trusted him with children, but he never caused any trouble that could be easily seen. On the surface, Ed appeared quiet and simple, but his loneliness was growing into something far more disturbing. Ed often visited the local library, where he developed a strange interest in anatomy books, medical journals, and stories about death. He became fascinated with tales of cannibals, grave robbers, and Nazi experiments. His quiet nights at the farm were filled with reading about dark subjects, which fed his unusual thoughts. People noticed his odd laugh at random moments and the strange way he would speak, as if talking to himself. Though townspeople whispered about him, They never imagined the truth. Ed kept his secrets well hidden, masking his obsessions behind a polite smile. But beneath this mask, he was already drifting into a world where fantasy and reality blurred. The man who once seemed harmless was quietly building the twisted behaviors that would one day horrify not only Plainfield but the entire country. Discovery of his crimes. The quiet town of Plainfield changed forever on November 16, 1957. That morning, hardware store owner Bernice Worden went missing. Her store was found abandoned, with the cash register open and blood on the floor. Suspicion quickly turned to Ed Gein, since he had been one of the last customers seen there. Police drove out to his lonely farm, expecting to question him. What they found instead was a nightmare. Inside Ed's farmhouse, officers discovered horrors beyond imagination. Human skulls were turned into bowls, chairs made from human skin, and masks crafted from the faces of the dead. In the shed, they found the body of Bernice Worden, hung like an animal and cut apart. The shocking scene revealed that Ed had been robbing graves for years, using the remains to create disturbing objects. His fascination with death had grown into unspeakable acts. The discovery stunned everyone who knew him. The shy, quiet man they thought was harmless was now revealed as a killer and a grave robber. Neighbors who once welcomed him into their homes struggled to believe what the police uncovered. The farm quickly became known as the House of Horrors, and Ed Gein's name would forever be linked to some of the darkest crimes in American history. Shocking grave robberies. When police investigated further, they uncovered the full extent of Ed Gein's secret life. For years, he had been sneaking into local cemeteries at night, digging up freshly buried bodies and taking them back to his farm. He admitted to making as many as 40 trips to graveyards, though he claimed that on some nights he would leave without digging anything up. On other nights, however, he exhumed bodies of women who reminded him of his mother, Augusta. These remains became part of the horrifying items found in his house. The people of Plainfield were horrified to learn their loved ones' graves had been desecrated. Families feared that the remains of their relatives had been stolen, and many demanded that cemeteries be searched. The grave robberies revealed that Ed's crimes were not just about murder. They were about obsession, fantasy, and a disturbing attempt to bring back the only person he had ever truly loved, his mother. Trial and sentence. After his arrest, Ed Gein's case became one of the most shocking trials in American history. The court had to decide not only if he was guilty, but also if he was sane enough to stand trial. Ed admitted to killing Bernice Worden and also confessed to the murder of Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who had gone missing years earlier. However, he claimed he could not always tell the difference between reality and his disturbing fantasies. His calm manner in court unsettled many, as he spoke about his crimes with little emotion. Ed spent the rest of his life at Central State Hospital and later at Mendota Mental Health Institute. Reports said he was quiet and cooperative, often doing small chores and reading. He never showed signs of regret or deep understanding of his actions. He died in 1984 at the age of 77, leaving behind a legacy of terror that still haunts American culture. Lasting impact on horror. The crimes of Ed Gein left scars not only on the small town of Plainfield, but also on the entire world of storytelling. His twisted acts became the inspiration for some of the most famous horror films ever made. The character Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs all drew details from Gein's life and crimes. Filmmakers and writers found his story so disturbing that it reshaped the way horror was portrayed in popular culture. Beyond films, Ed Gein's name became a symbol of fear and fascination. Newspapers and magazines published countless articles, and his farm was remembered as the House of Horrors. True crime writers studied his background, trying to understand how a quiet, seemingly harmless man could commit such unimaginable acts. Even decades later, his crimes are discussed as examples of how isolation, abuse, and obsession can twist a human mind. The impact of Ed Gein goes beyond the crimes themselves. It changed how people viewed the darkness within society. His story became a warning about hidden monsters who may live unnoticed in ordinary communities. Though Ed Gein has been gone for many years, the terror he created continues to influence horror stories and remains one of the darkest chapters in true crime history.